Good evening. I'm Tracy with KOGmissions.com, and tonight Carlos Xavier is my guest. I moderated his debate with Dean Izzard, Are the Sons of God in Genesis 6 Human? And this evening we're going to review some of the topics that came up in the debate and maybe a few more things that could relate to this discussion that you may find interesting. So you'll want to stick around until the end for those. Carlos, welcome.
Hi, Tracy. Good evening. Good morning to everyone out there.
Yes, we have people all around the world, so evening, morning, afternoon.
That's right.
And to all those that are going to be watching from Europe that are in the middle of the night right now. But Carlos, I wanted to thank you for all the hard work that you put into these debates, and thank you for debating in a Christ-like manner. I always hear from people how impressed they are with your patience and your respect for your opponents, as well as your knowledge and biblical presentation of the subject matter. So thank you. I know it's a lot of work.
Oh, thank you. And thanks to my wife for putting up with it all.
Yes, even more so. So we want to get right into this. Would you first begin by briefly telling us why you think this topic even matters? Why'd you do this debate?
Yeah, so I'll quote Michael Heiser, one of the scholars I quoted in my opening, and he used to say that if you want a fuller understanding of who we are, the mess we're in, as in this present evil age, sin and evil, and why things happen, quote unquote, to good people. If you'd like to know all about that, this story in Genesis 6 is highly significant and important. It's not just about human sin, which we all agree, and this is what I told my opponent. It's of course it's about human sin, but it has an added ingredient that puts it in a class of its own, makes it very unique and relevant to what it continues to happen to this day. It further defines, again, the present evil age, as Paul calls it, why Satan is the God of this age. That's from the Apostle Paul himself saying that. And ultimately, the need for a Messiah, for a Savior, for one of us, a representative of all humanity, and what he's going to do by the power of God in the future, which is the universal reversal of the wickedness, the evil governments, the nations that are demonized, as Psalm 96 says. He will bring that all to an end because the Messiah will establish what the Bible calls the kingdom of God on the earth, on a renewed earth, not this same earth. And I think I heard another evangelical say that the information in Genesis 6 is groundbreaking, and the church is simply not getting it. Jesus came for more than just to die for our sins. So,
Amen. Well, we see in Genesis 1 what he came to do when God prophesied what he would do to the serpent and crush his head. So I think that's great because a lot of people think, oh, this is a silly matter. Why bother debating it? But I think that's perfect what you said. And you don't hear that preached too often on Sunday morning.
that's right. So my opponent, if you want to start there,
Yeah.
I'll first to describe who my opponent was. Dean Izzard is his name, from Australia, and I appreciate him taking the time. And you talk about the effort and work that goes into debates, and I appreciate that from all of my opponents, regardless of how they feel about me. And some, as you know, see us as quote demons. um, but look, my opponent comes from a tradition called Christadelphian or Christadelphianism. Now, they hold a rather unique view in Christendom, and that is relevant to this topic, is they don't believe that there are demons, that there are fallen angels, and that there's a personal, individual, real, external Satan or devil. So they don't believe that. So it was rather interesting, the debate, because again, most self-professing Christians, obviously we do see that in the Bible, from the Old to the New Testament. We see fallen angels, obviously demons in the Gospels. That that was probably his primary opponents, demons, apart from the Pharisees.
Mhm.
So it's very clear to most of us. So it's a rather unique view that he had. But when it comes to Genesis 6, my opponent represented a lot of other Christians from Catholic Protestant system and even Unitarians or non-Trinitarians who would agree with him that Genesis 6 is not about fallen angels, it's not about demons, it's simply about people. Uh, the whole debate was about this term sons of God as used in Genesis 6, who take these women and procreate these Nephilim, as the Hebrew has it. The Greek translates that as giants. So my opponent would agree with many self professing Christians who are not Christadelphians that these were simply godly men, the sons of God, who basically just procreate with daughters of humankind who may be ungodly as well. And these people go on to father these giants, these Nephilim, who again are human. So it's all a humanistic view, if you will, or a human view, I should say. And these Nephilim or giants are simply mighty warrior kings or rulers of ancient times. So he offered a few points to prove that. And you can watch the full debate. I think you have it in the video description on this.
Yes, and I put it in the chat over there too as well for tonight.
Thank you. So one of his points was that the context of Genesis 6 is about humans, not angels. In other words, we don't see the usual word for angel, which is the Hebrew malak, translated as angelos in the Greek. So we don't see that word at all. That was one of his points. The other point that they stress, this view of humans as sons of God, is that angels are not human. Obviously, these are spiritual beings, non-physical. Uh, like I believe all of God creations, creatures have some kind of corporeal body, but obviously they're not flesh and blood angels, right? Um, and therefore they cannot marry, they cannot procreate, and it's an impossibility. Especially they take after that text, I believe it's in Matthew 22, where Jesus says that at the resurrection we will be humans, Christians, like the angels who do not marry. I think Jesus says there. So they used that text. He also used,
Can I make a comment on that text real quick?
yeah,
Yeah, I think the problem is they try to take it out of the context of what Jesus was speaking about, because the context was about resurrection, not about angels. And I think, they're reading into that. The point was that you're not going to be getting married. You're not going to be having those same relationships that you do today. And obviously, angels don't marry, but that was the last point, of that little bit. But it was resurrection that Jesus was teaching on, not angels and marriage.
right. And his other point was that the term or the phrase sons of God, which is really what the debate is about, the Hebrew is B'nai Elohim, and the Greek is angelos. So sometimes it is translated as angelos. So I appealed. Later, I'll give our view or my view, but he was appealing to the fact that, again, the word malak, or the usual word for angel, Hebrew malak, Greek angelos, is not used. And in his understanding, B'nai Elohim does not always mean angels. And he used, I believe, the New Testament to say that in the New Testament, sons of God, the same term, is used for Christians, right? Men and women, believers in the Messiah. And therefore, he transposed, as it were, New Testament meanings to the Old Testament without any change. So that was it. And his last point, I think, he was sort of ambiguous. He wasn't very clear on exactly who the sons of God were in terms of what group of humans were they. So there's a so-called Sethite or sons of Seth view, So they were of the line of Seth. And there's also, he talked about how, well, they could also be, I think he said, God, just godly people, godly males, men. So he was sort of on the fence of that, I feel, in his debate. You can go and watch it once again to his opening. And I think he was uncommittal in that. So that made it a bit difficult because the sons of Seth, so-called view, is the popular one that most people appeal to.
And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Would you share a little bit about your view on it being angels?
Yeah. So the earliest view of Genesis 6 is that they were these were fallen angels, obviously not holy angels. So in my opening, I appealed first to the New Testament, to the letters of Peter and Jude. So the first letter of Peter, chapter 3, and the second letter of Peter, chapter 2, and the letter of Jude, where there are rather detailed passages there in those sections in the New Testament where I believe they are commenting on Genesis 6. So to make my point a bit clearer here, I'll show this. In my debate, I used what I call the five W's of Peter and Jude. So they pretty much tell us who they're talking about, and they explicitly do use the word angels who sinned. First Peter 3 uses the very rather um, how can I call this unique term spirits in the plural. He talks about spirits in prison that Jesus, after he was raised from the dead, went to speak to proclaim something to. First Peter 3 verses 18 and 19. And that word spirits is almost invariably without as a without qualification, as they call it, used for angels or demons. So I showed the example how in the Gospels, Jesus goes around interacting with, quote, spirits in the plural. So they're typically angels or demons in that case. So Peter and Jude also give us the what, and they went after strange flesh. And I believe Jude uses this rather unique phrase, a strange flesh, not used anywhere else, for what these fallen angels were after. They also tell us the when this happened, and explicitly we get a reference to during the days of Noah. They tell us where these fallen angels, what happened to them. In other words, we know what happens to humanity in Genesis 6. Everyone dies except the family of Noah. But we don't exactly know what happened to these sons of God, fallen angels, as I understand it. And they give us this information, and they're in a place called Tartarus, which is again a rather unique Greek word that is found outside of the Bible in myths and legends about, for example, Homer's Iliad and Greco-Roman stories of, you know, angels and gods and things like that, demons. And they also give us the why this happened. So it was simply because they committed a great sin of sexual immorality or sexual perversion, which involved lust and going after these, as Genesis 6 says, beautiful women. So all that information, all those W's, the five W's, I can see, most of us can see very clearly in Peter and Jude. So that was the view, the earliest view of not only BC times, but also the early Christian era up to at least the 4th century, when a guy called Julius Africanus introduced, for as far as we can see, the first time this notion of sons of God as maybe the sons of Seth.
Yeah.
And
Well, would you share maybe a little bit more about that? I know it came up a little bit in the debate, but I think when you and I were discussing it, we didn't really find that Mr. Izzard took a position really on this topic
on Africanus.
on the sons of Seth.
Oh, right. Yeah, I'll get to.
Oh, I thought you were done and you were talking about the sons of Seth already.
No. So yeah, so this was the earliest view, right? So this is nothing we're coming up with. We're just, I think, following on from the earliest view of BC times. So this information is found in the books of Enoch. Now, I do not consider First Enoch or Second Enoch or Third Enoch scripture. I don't think they're in the canon. But the New Testament, many times, I think I read, I think there's a Wikipedia article if you Google it, how many extra biblical books and works the New Testament writers either quote or reference or allude to, make direct allusions to, and I think it numbered like 100.
Hmm.
So you're talking poets and Homer and other works like that. So when that happens, right, when a New Testament writers quotes or alludes to an extra biblical work, it doesn't make that work, all of it, inspired, obviously. But the information said New Testament writer uses, of course, I take that as inspired scripture. Anyway, so when it comes to the sons of God, um, it can be shown very clearly that especially Jude is using, even quoting at one time, it seems, from, I believe it's the first book of Enoch. Now, I'll just briefly read you a section of First Enoch. So this information of Genesis 6 is almost verbatim, word for word, recorded in the books of Enoch. Now, the books of Enoch, I think, have been pretty universally accepted as BC time books before the Christian era. There are sections that have been found in the famous Qumran caves of the Dead Sea, also known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. So that further solidifies the fact that these are BC times records, right? Views. So First Enoch chapter 6. So you can read chapters 6 to 11, but I'll just give you a quote here, and you can hear Genesis 6 very clearly. So it's also found in what some call the Book of the Watchers, which is again from the Enoch manuscripts or traditions. And when the sons of men had multiplied in those days, so this is First Enoch, beautiful and comely daughters were born to them. And the watchers, the sons of heaven, saw them and desired them. Now, that word watchers actually appears as another name for angels in the book of Daniel, in Daniel chapter 10. Now, that section of Daniel, as you know, Daniel was written in Hebrew and Aramaic, but that word translated watchers is from an Aramaic word, which is also found in the book of Daniel. So it's well known that that's simply another word for angels or an angel. So the watchers, the sons of heaven, saw these beautiful daughters of humans, desired them, and they said to one another, so this is the added information, right? So you have these angels who are about to fall, about to sin, and they're having this conversation. And they say to one another, let us choose for ourselves wives from the daughters of men, and let us beget, that is, procreate or father, children for ourselves. And then Enoch says that the giants who are produced from the cohabitation of spirits and flesh shall be called evil spirits upon the earth. So, you not only have echoes of Genesis 6, now you even have echoes of 1 Peter 3:19 by the word spirits. used in reference to the affirmation watchers, also known as the sons of heaven, in this first Enoch book. So it it is too much of a coincidence that you have Jewish books before the Christian era reading Genesis 6, understanding Genesis 6 in such a comparable way as to how the Hebrew the writer of Genesis records it. So I don't think it's coincidence at all. Of course, I'm being facetious. I
Right.
believe it's actually this was the actual understanding of the time. Now look, you can say they were wrong. You can say these Jewish writers before the Christian era and earliest writers during the Christian era, at least 400 years, right? They're all wrong. But again, you don't have the view that my opponent proposed that the sons of God of Genesis 6 were humans, simply procreating with other humans.
All right. So you ready to move on to the sons of Seth now?
Yeah, so again, my opponent was, I believe, uncommittal in his approach to the debate. He did not fully commit to the sons of Seth. He said, "Oh, it could be just other godly people." Um, now let's see. So first, let me read to you the view of the sons of Seth, which is similar to the one my opponent proposed. So if we read Genesis 6, so we're reading the first four or eight verses, right? The sons of God are godly men from the line of Seth, who first called on the name of Yahweh in Genesis 4, verse 26. So these men, I should say, went after and took ungodly daughters of other men who are probably from the line of Cain to procreate children. And these children are called Nephilim in the Hebrew, a Hebrew word, which the Greek translates as giants. But they're called giants, so goes the Seth view, because they were great and mighty ruler, warrior kings of ancient times. So that's the I believe I'm representing the sense of Seth view here. Now, the first thing I would say that not only myself but others is that Genesis 4:26, right? So this is the chapter which let me just bring it up here just to make sure. So this is the story of Cain and Abel, chapter 4, right? Genesis 4. And we know that story very well. So then Cain kills Abel. So then Adam and Eve, it goes on to say, had more children. And one of those is named Seth. So this would be Seth is the third child, I guess. Is that correct? So you got Cain, Abel.
Yeah, the third son that's recorded there.
Exactly. Now, it, so let me read Genesis 4:25. Adam had marital relations with his wife, and she gave birth to a son. She named him Seth, saying, God has given me another child in place of Abel because Cain killed him. And then verse 26, and a son was also born to Seth, whom he named Enosh. At that time, people began to worship the Lord. So the sons of Seth view latches on to that last statement where it says that at that time, people, it doesn't specifically say Seth or his family only. It just says people began to worship the Lord. Now, we're not exactly sure what that means. They began to call on the name of the Lord. Some others translate the Hebrew there. But this is where they rely on saying that, oh, this is only the family of Seth who are godly people at that time on the whole of the earth, and the rest of the people are wicked. But again, it does not say that only Seth and his sons called on the name of the Lord, or as I'm reading, by the way, the New English translation, nor does it say that only Seth worshiped the Lord or his family worshiped the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I think you and I had discussed too prior to the debate in the Genesis 6 passage that if you really look at the context of it, that the first verse or two there, it's talking about humans reproducing, which is what God had told them to do. And there's no hint at it being evil or bad. And then it mentions these women being born and it calls them beautiful. Again, it's not saying anything about the women or anybody else that they're evil until it brings in what seems to be this third party, something that is different from what was in verses 1 and 2, that now had these relationships with these women.
right, and that's one of the questions I had during the cross exam, because I'm trying to understand where, in other words, if we go back to, or forward, I should say, so we're in Genesis 4, let's go back to Genesis 6. So I asked my opponent, so if this is just humans multiplying on the face of the earth, but why does then God go on to say in verse 3, right? My spirit will not, will no longer be with humans, and I'm going to kill everything. Note, right? It's not just humans, it's all living things. Out of the blue. Well, like, what is the explanation? This is to this day one of my big questions on the Sethite view or the godly people view. I mean, we're only doing, by the way, what God commanded us to do all the way back in, what was it, Genesis 1. I mean, this is why um, God created Eve, so we can
Well, and it doesn't
multiply.
say, Carlos, they were taking somebody else's wife, like adultery or anything like that. It doesn't give us any hint that there's some sinful relationship going on.
Yeah, I mean, the text doesn't say that the daughters of humans were evil. It, I mean, you literally have to read that into the text. I mean, you have to read into both texts of sons of God. You have to read into it something other than angels. Now, by the way, just to go back to the sons of God, that phrase "B'nai Elohim," right? It appears, I think, around 6 times in the Hebrew Bible, and it appears predominantly in the book of Job, Job chapters 1 and 2, Job's chapter 1 and 2, and it well, I shouldn't say obviously, but there's debate, but I believe it's a reference to angels in heaven. Now, my opponent did agree, by the way, that uh, one of the references of B'nai Elohim, which is again in the book of Job, chapter 38, verse 7, it says, "When the morning stars sang in chorus, all the sons of God shouted for joy." So my opponent agreed that uh, those are angels. So yeah, so the other question I had is to the sons of Seth view: why would godly, faithful sons of God go after faithless, ungodly women, as you were saying, Tracy? It makes no sense. It doesn't say that in the text. You have to read it in the text. The other thing against the sons of Seth view is that Genesis 6, verses 1, let's see. So if we go back to Genesis 6, when humankind or mankind began to multiply on the face of the earth, daughters were born to them. The sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful. Now, the word translated humankind or humans is the Hebrew Adam, which becomes the name of the first man, right? Adam. Now, the text distinguishes the phrase sons of God from humankind in verse 1, which would include uh, everyone, the family of Seth or Cain, and clearly states that the daughters of humankind, Adam, the same word, right? Hebrew word, are human women in general. not just the daughters of Cain, as the sons of Seth view proposes, and also the phrase sons of God, B'nai Elohim in the Hebrew, is never used for Seth or his family anywhere else. So this would be a unique case, I guess, if you hold to the sons of Seth view. The word Adam, to go back to that in verses 1 and 2, is given, then you have to give it two totally different meanings. In verse 1, it's a broad reference to all of humanity, which is multiplying. But then in verse 2, you'd have to say that it has a narrow reference to some, as my opponent. He said, well, some, not all daughters of humankind.
Mhm.
To some daughters, because they were wicked. And obviously, I don't think he was saying that all the daughters were wicked, just some.
Right. Well, I my lesson for the youth on Sunday is in regard to this too, and in there I note that if all we had was Genesis 6, the only thing we can conclude, like I said before, is people were reproducing like God said. Some other third party came in and started doing the same. God condemned it, and that's all we have. But if we take the whole Bible in context, like you did at the debate with Peter and Jude, now we're given more information that ties it together. And Jude beautifully explains everything about that. And you can then see more about what Genesis 6 was talking about. It's difficult, I think, to make definite statements about things without using those New Testament passages because there just isn't any more information given in Genesis 6.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this was one of the shocking things to me with the debate because my opponent in his opening totally ignored Jude and Peter. Now, I know well, actually, even though he agreed that Jude and Peter are talking about during the days of Noah, I mean, because it explicitly says it.
Mm-hmm.
So, although he doesn't agree, I guess, in the interpretation of Jude and Peter, but nonetheless, he totally ignored those passages which are crucial to the debate, and that is a giveaway to me, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you have to address those texts. Now he did in his rebuttal, as he kept reminding me. But my point was that it was astonishing to me that in your opening, in giving your view, you won't even tell us what they're talking about, because if you don't believe they're talking about fallen angels, so what are they talking about? Even though he agreed, my opponent, that the setting was the days of Noah before the flood
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
after the flood, because Jude also, as you know, brings in Genesis chapters 18 and 19 about Sodom and Gomorrah.
Right. Yeah. Yes. So do you have any more thoughts on Seth view, or do you have any other thoughts that you'd like to share in regard to the debate? Otherwise, we'll move on to a few other things.
Yep, let me address two things about the sons of Seth view. If you look at I'll put it here on the screen, see if I can share this. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, this is Bible Hub. You can look this up yourself, but I want to show you what I believe is a bias by translators, English translators. There's a bias which pushes the human view of Genesis 6, and I'll show you in what way I believe English translators are pushing that Genesis 6, it's really about humans, nothing more, nothing less. It's just humans multiplying. You'll note there that I highlighted, I hope you can see that, the word wives. You see that there?
Yes, it's clear.
Okay, so invariably, you have wives there. Um, I see that the Aramaic has women, which is interesting, but pretty much everywhere else, I'll say most of the time, not invariably, you have wives. And then you also have married or marriage. And the NIV uses married, and God's Word translation, which is a paraphrase. And let's see. So that's about
And
it,
that's something
I
you have to be
think.
careful with, Carlos, too, when people are using commentaries. We can find some good information there, but you have to remember this is, man's view, what they're writing, and you can use this to weigh it out. But if you go to the interlinear there and you can see the actual Hebrew of it, which you'll probably be bringing up right now, it doesn't say that. And wives is only one of the, women or females that can be used, and it would probably be more accurate because it isn't talking about marriage.
Right. And I think the point of the language as used here in these verses or this verse, it's about something immoral, sexual immorality, sexual perversion. The marriage idea, the which comes from the translation of the Hebrew word for wives, right? So let me show you as you were saying there. So if you look at the interlinear, they took
Right down there, 802 wives, right here.
nashim or
Mhm.
nasim. Okay, so that Hebrew word, right? It can mean wives depending on the context. Okay, but I believe that there's a bit of a bias here because they're trying to push the marriage idea because the Hebrew translated there as wives is simply the normal plural word for women, nashim. Again, depending on the context, words have different meaning depending on the context.
Well, is there a
So
different word for wives anyway, too?
no, it's the same word. It can
Same
be
word,
used for women in the plural or wives.
just context.
Context. So let's go back to the context. What is the context? Well, as I said earlier, it's about sexual immorality. And note also that it goes on to say that they took as many as they wanted. So this is not marriage as we understand marriage as a monogamous relationship, right? This sounds a lot like polygamy as well. So the taking in verse 2 uh, pushes the idea that this has nothing really to do with formal marriages taking places. This has to do with these sons of God, who I believe are fallen angels, just picking and choosing however beautiful women they saw on earth. And then if you go to verse 4, so they go in, they take women, and then verse 4 has this phrase. Um, let's see. The NIV has when the sons of God went to the daughters. Okay. Others translate the Hebrew there as they go into the daughters. Let me see if I can find it here.
Even with that, Carlos, before you go on with that thought, it's if you go scroll back up there, it still says to the daughters of humans. Why would it be distinguishing that these are daughters of humans if they were just talking about they were all people? I mean, you don't say, oh, Seth was a human man and whoever woman was a human woman.
Right. So you see there the Septuagint translation, right, has they go into the women. So these are phrases. Um, it's phrases pointing to sexual relations that are not exclusively used for marriage.
Mm-hmm.
These are describing where elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible, this is the typical way of talking, for example, of a rape or an illicit sexual relationship. So the man takes or goes into the woman. that it's sort of a biblical, what they call a biblical euphemism. So as coming in or going to the women, and this is found throughout the Hebrew Bible, as I noted in the debate. And at this time, there's no command against marrying. And I think you said that earlier, Tracy, that
Mhm.
the if these are just people multiplying, people marrying, even if you go with the marriage idea that I believe is imposed upon the text by English translators because they need the human view, there's no commandment against that. That was actually the commandment to procreate. So the concept also of Israel's sonship, I said in the debate, refers to the relationship between God and his people, and not to the whether these were godly men, the sons of God, involved in this marrying, if you want to look at it as such.
Mhm. All right. Well, thank you so much. I think that was good. As Sharon says, that both doing such a great job of clarifying. So, yes, thank you, Carlos, for all that work. And I'm blessed to be able to talk to you about these things outside of these debates. If you don't have anything else about the debate, I have another question for you. Are you done with the debate stuff?
One more thing about the children. I'll end with the actually the children. Just quickly back to the angels. That angels
Okay.
cannot procreate and so on. So in the debate, this was another burning question. If the sons of God are simply people, men, not fallen angels, how do you explain the Nephilim giants? So the Hebrew word for Nephilim, sorry, the Hebrew word for the children is Nephilim, translated as I said as giants. So this is the product of the sons of God taking the daughters of humans. Now that word is rather unique, Nephilim. It appears once more in Numbers chapter 13. And that's a story about the spies in the land. Remember, I believe it's
Mm-hmm.
Joshua.
Mm-hmm.
He sent spies into the promised land to conquer it, and they're freaked out. They come back with an amazing report, and they talk about how they saw the Nephilim there, and they saw other tribes, and they were massive. And we felt like grasshoppers, and they had massive cities. And I mean, it sounds so sort of almost magical. Now, we also know from the Hebrew record, the scriptures itself, that there were giants after the flood too. And this is what Genesis 6 does say, right? There were giants or Nephilim during those days and also after. So it sounds like they either continued, these fallen angels continued to commit sin in a lesser form, I guess. But nonetheless, we have at least two specific references to exactly how big these people were. We have a King Og, which I mentioned in the debate, OG, the what is it called? The word is OG, King Og, and he said he was probably up to 13 feet in height. You have the famous story of Goliath that David fought, and he was, according to the Masoretic text, the Greek translation, and other records, Goliath was up to 10 feet. So, again, my burning question was how can humans produce, children that are 13 feet? Now, my opponent brought up the fact that, well, Carlos, we have records today of some people reaching 8 feet tall. And that's true. The tallest person ever recorded in modern history, as far as I know, was an Englishman. I forgot his name, and I think he reached 8 feet 2 or 3 inches, so just above 8 feet. Now that's not exactly 10 feet. That's not exactly 13 feet. when you get these cases of people, it's usually obviously a physical or genetic problem.
Well, and
And
they didn't say, excuse me, they didn't say we just saw one or two. It said we saw them, like a whole bunch of them. They were like all over the place. If there was one or two, they'd be like, oh, well, we can take them.
exactly. So the Bible talks about nations of giants, not just one individual with some genetic deformity or problem. And the other thing is that these people usually die very young because obviously, their growth hormones or whatever glands or whatever is going wrong, they eventually die very young, either in their teenage years or in their early 20s. I believe this Englishman died when he was like 26. So it's totally different. And don't get me started with basketball players.
Hmm.
Well, Carlos, go to a NBA or watch the basketball. Come on. Again, we're talking about people who are twice the size at least of our modern day athletes, or people with uh, glandular problems or whatever. And then the last thing is just to go back to the angels. So we talked about Matthew 22, verse 30. So Jesus there, as you said, and I'll just emphasize this, because you cannot take that text and contradict Peter and Jude and Genesis 6, because obviously Jesus is talking about holy angels. And my view is that these were angels who fell, fallen angels, angels who disobeyed. As Jude and Peter say, they left their place, their place that they were assigned.
It was their choice.
And also, just because they're called spirits, right, by First Peter 3, the word spirit or spirits in the plural doesn't mean they don't have a body. There's this concept, Tracy, that when you talk about spiritual beings, for example, people tend to think, oh, they're like, I don't know, like a cloud or
A wispy ghost.
some, I don't even know, a gas.
Yeah.
No, they have a body. All creatures have bodies of some kind. Obviously, they're not physical flesh and blood bodies, but they have a body. And they can also become physical. They can become flesh and blood angels. And in my debate, I gave the famous story of Genesis 18, three men who turn out to be the angels or angels. And one of them is even identified as Yahweh, God Himself, because he's probably the angel of the Lord, who's sometimes identified as Yahweh. And also the story of Jacob. In Genesis chapter 32, Jacob famously wrestles physically with a person. He thinks it's a man, but
Yeah.
then it turns out to be an angel. So angels can become very much physical. By the way, just to go back to Genesis 18, those three angels ate and drank with Abraham, if you remember. So they obviously can take on physical features, but in Genesis 6, they went obviously a step too far. Um,
Right. Right.
so yeah,
Yeah, I
thank
think those two are great examples, especially the wrestling one too. I mean, he wasn't just holding on to air.
right.
Right.
And today, just one other thing, Tracy.
You're
Um,
using up all your time, Carlos, but keep going.
well, one of the things that sort of bothers me is, especially with Christadelphians who do not believe in fallen angels, demons, or the devil as an external being, is that they tend to say, well, we don't see that today. We don't see demonic people demonized. We don't see uh, those type of supernatural things. Oh yeah, there are stories and there are things like that, but they're only like in Africa or in some poor place, and they're backward societies and they don't know any less. They're still following these old ancient traditions, and there's a lot of paganism there. Well, you should read up on histories of countries like the USA and other so-called advanced uh, first world countries, there are many stories that sound a lot like Genesis 6, where there
Hmm.
is stuff where there are beings attacking people in such a physical way that it very much resembles uh, the story of Genesis 6. So
Well,
thank you.
that's what I wanted to get into here. That this wasn't really part of the debate, but I think it counters a lot of the naysayers here about fallen angels and demons and these documented phenomenon. They're scientists, they're people researching this, and I think they're interesting to consider. And I know that you've done a lot of research on all of this. I do think that you and I would both probably say that we can't say for sure, but really the evidence really seems to line up and give us some food for thought. And as you mentioned, that there are many people, especially in the West, and most Christadelphians, I presume, would dismiss this evidence, like you said, and say it's just superstition or third world country stuff. But let's consider one documented case that you brought to my attention of this phenomenon and discuss how it sounds similar to, like, the alien abductions or things like that have been reported. So if you could briefly describe that entity case for our viewers and then share your thoughts on that, please.
Yeah, I mean, I was reminded of this movie. It was made into a movie in the early 80s. It's called The Entity. It's very graphic, parts of it anyway. So, don't have the children present. But um, yeah, it's a story that I believe it's one of the best documented scientifically accounts, and it involves what very much sounds like the things of Genesis 6, where this woman and her four children, by the way, experience attacks of a very physical and violent and sexual nature. Um, so it's based on a book, but the book itself is based on the real event. And what makes it sort of uh, takes it out of the realm of hearsay and maybe what do you call those things, urban legends, right? Is that there were a lot of scientists involved in this case, and this case was studied over months. I believe it was a total of 3 months. Scientists, researchers, psychiatrists, everything.
Well, and
And,
Carlos said sometimes when they were seeing that, there were like 25 people in the room and they all saw the same thing. It wasn't just, hallucination or something.
yeah, and multiple witnesses. At one point, according to the records, there were 25 people present when all hell, as you say, broke loose. So so it's definitely not. These cases are not of demons and demonization, demon so-called possession. They're not, in Africa, in some poor country in Central America. They're all over the place. I believe this is further proof to me and many Christians that there is a demonic system. Paul calls it the elemental principles of this present evil age in the letter to Colossia and Galatians. Paul's definitely believed in the supernatural demonic world. He talks about how they're even in what we might call heaven, in the stratosphere, I guess. These things are under the earth. Isaiah has a passage about how there are spirits of the dead. Again, spirits. Just quickly, another thing I want to stress about First Peter 3. And as a matter of fact, let me bring it up here because this is something my opponent in the debate had great difficulty with, and many who hold to the sons of Seth or human view of uh, of Genesis 6. So in First Peter 3, trying to bring it up here. So I'm using the New English Translation Bible once again. And you can see in the debate how difficult this is for those who hold to the non-angel view. But in First Peter 3, as you see there, it says that after Jesus is raised from the dead, as you see there, he's made alive in the spirit, and in the spirit, in it, it says here the NET, uh, he goes and in which the Greek there, I'm just at the bottom, in which he preached, actually the word there is proclaimed to the spirits in prison. So Jesus, after he's raised from the dead, goes somewhere, a place called the prison, which I believe is this place Tartarus, that the other writers fill us in on, which is believed to be underground, not exactly the grave or as the Hebrew calls it, Sheol, but it's somewhere on a compartment maybe. And the point here is that Jesus um, preaches to or talks to these spirits, not during the days of Noah, not during his ministry, but in the context of First Peter 3, he does this after he was raised from the dead. My opponent had great trouble with this passage specifically. In he had troubles showing that the word spirits, again in the plural, is used for humans and anywhere else without qualification, as we call it. Um, and he had great trouble. Let me bring it back up here. In when this happened, when did Jesus do this? At one point, he gave, I think at one point he gave me like three answers. He said, "Oh, it could have been during the days of Noah. It could have been during his ministry, and it could have been to his apostles 40 days after he was raised from the dead." So yeah, that's a tricky one, I think, for
Well,
them.
the interesting thing, Carlos, is he agrees with us that Jesus was human. He didn't pre-exist. And so obviously it wasn't back then if it was Jesus. And he also agrees with the sleep of the dead, that when you're dead, you're dead. So it can't be anybody that was dead because they would be sleeping and not talking or listening or anything else. They certainly wouldn't be held over frozen from the time of Noah until Jesus's time and just
Right,
woken up to listen to Jesus proclaim that.
right. And thanks for bringing that up, because if you keep reading, right, Peter says that the spirits are those who disobeyed long ago when God patiently waited in the days of Noah.
Right.
So that was a lot of uh, um, what's the word I'm looking for? That was of great problems, because Christadelphians, and this is something we by the way agree on a lot of things, on too many things for this to be a disagreement. We agree with Christadelphians. In other words, we agree that there's no Trinity, that Jesus is the human son, he didn't pre-exist. We agree on the sleep of the dead. But that passage right there is problematic then, if you believe that the dead are dead. In other words, they're described as asleep by Paul, right? It's a metaphor for death. You're asleep. And if you're asleep, you're not awake. So it was a lot of trouble for him because he could not explain if these are human spirits. Um, how, how is it? How is it that they're alive? And then at one point, Tracy, he even said, I believe, that it could have been a vision, or it could have been that they were raised from the dead temporarily, so Jesus would talk to them and then go back to the grave, I guess. So
Right. Right. Yeah. So, do you have anything else to share, maybe in regard to that entity case or ghost, UFOs, or anything like that? Because we get a lot of these reports, And, like that one gentleman said who was researching the entity case, that, you get, 25% of them only are maybe legit people that actually had something happen. But there are those people. I mean, obviously you get the people who are just making things up and, doing that hoax or whatever. But, there are like this one legitimate where many people saw it, and how do you explain that? And it really does seem to fit with what we saw back in Genesis 6 and what Peter and Jude talk about as well.
Yeah, when it comes to UFOs, and I know probably a lot of our viewers or people listening are probably rolling their eyes, but I think as Christians, we must offer some kind of response. I mean, UFOs, right? Aliens or whatever, it's nothing new. These are stories that go back to, Egyptian times. So for us to simply ignore that or dismiss it or roll my eyes to you and go, oh, you're crazy. No, I think first of all that's rude. Um, and second
Even
of
if
all,
you can't see you.
there's too much evidence. There's just look. This is what I say about UFOs, Tracy, is that it's sort of ironic that people who rely on eyewitness accounts from thousands of years ago, like we do, right? I didn't see Jesus. You didn't see Jesus. So people who rely on our religion relies on eyewitnesses, yet we have millennia old eyewitnesses to these so-called UFOs, flying saucers, whatever you want to call them, and we're just going to, oh, don't be crazy, oh, just dismiss you, oh, stop reading or watching too many movies. I think we need I think we need Christians to take this seriously, especially after our own government, the U.S. government, recently, for the first time in 70 years, finally confessed that they have been lying. No big surprise there, right? But the military has been lying about these things in the skies. I think, as a Christian now, these are probably fallen angels, demons. They're, I don't think they're friendlies. I think this is another tactic by Satan to mislead the world. For those people who hold to the aliens view, to make us believe that there are other life forms out there more advanced than humans, when the Bible tells me that we are unique. We are rulers of this whole thing, according to Genesis. If you read it, it says that. So to me, they're demonic tactics. They're probably angelic in nature and not friendly. The eyewitness accounts of these things are obviously supernatural. In other words, you have the best of us in the air, pilots, and not just any old pilot. These are military pilots, jet pilots, astronauts, the best of the best, people who have trained their whole life to use this and this, and they cannot explain the movements and so forth and so on. These things move in such a way that scientists uh, have to admit they transverse physics. They they're supernatural. Clearly, they're underwater. They're in the sky. They're in the space. So I think these things are maybe related. And this is why, once again, going back to why we're talking about these things, and people might be saying, can you guys just focus on the Trinity and the gospel? But I think it has to do with the gospel. Again, you want to know why we are in the situation we are as human beings, as a world, as a system that is dominated by evil, where there's, as time goes on, Tracy, there's barely any good to see in societies, in our communities. So much demonic activity. If you're a Christian, not just from the human side of it, but there are supernatural things out there. And again, read Paul. Paul is very much focused on the supernatural. What is it? Is it in Ephesians? Our battle is not with flesh and blood, but with what? So that's
Principalities. Yeah.
Ephesians chapter 1.
Carlos, could you please, because I know when people talk about the Nephilim, when they talk about these fallen angels, the sons of God, and demons and Satan, they flip-flop names a lot. If I'm correct, the Nephilim are the offspring of the fallen angel and the human, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so the Nephilim, they aren't, I would say they're probably not the aliens per se, because I would think that those would be more of the fallen angels, because the Nephilim are half human, half, like we see the superhumans, I guess, on the earth. They aren't the ones flying about. Now, I know you've shared before, there's some views that when the Nephilim died, there may be a difference in them than humans who die and are dead, where the spirit could of somehow that was in there from that fallen angel could live on, which could be the demons of Jesus' time that they were casting out. But I think there's a little bit of confusion about the Nephilim and the actual angels that have fallen and are the ones actually doing these crimes, as I would say.
Yeah, so there's some speculation on exactly what happened. Let's call them the first generation Nephilim or giants. So those before the flood. What happens to them? So that tradition of BC times and early Christian times I mentioned, they pretty much agree that some of these demons, some of them, look, the angelic system is full of different types of beings, angelic beings. And
Mm-hmm.
this goes for holy beings and evil beings. So there are
Mm-hmm.
different categories. You hear some of the names, cherubims or cherubims.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, if you look at, for example, the vision of Ezekiel chapter 1, you'll see how the prophet describes some of these angelic beings. There are different also status. There are archangels, right? Famously, Archangel Michael and Gabriel. There are also just angels. There are angels of the Lord. So there are different categories, different names. When it comes to demons, it's the same deal. They go under different names. You even have a very unique demon called Lilith, which is a female name. So it could be the first reference to a female angelic being that I know of.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in terms of the Nephilim, the tradition says that when the first generation Nephilim giants were destroyed in the flood, it is believed that God has allowed them to continue to exist in a disembodied state, similar to the demons Jesus encounters. If you remember in the famous story of Legion, so there's a demon, Jesus comes and asks them, "Who are you? What's your name?" And they say, he or they say, it's interesting, right? Plural and singular. We are Legion. Now, those demons in the Gospels, they are definitely disembodied beings because they actually need a host, they need a body. And if you remember, the demon begs Jesus to send them to the swine or the pig because it seems like they need a host body. So there are all different kinds and shapes. I believe that the Nephilim could have continued to exist in that state, in a disembodied state. The spirits in prison that Peter talks about, they're probably the fallen angels. In other
That's
words,
what I would agree with. Yeah.
yeah, the parents, if you will, not
Mm-hmm.
the disembodied Nephilim.
Right.
So
So, right. And the Nephilim, again, are the half human, I guess you could say. And we don't have any record whether, it says they were there after as well. Are they here today? I mean, we don't know because we don't have any biblical account.
I think
know,
they were eventually destroyed. Again, if you look at Numbers chapter 13 and following, the book of Joshua, they talk about how they go to battle with these nations in the land. By the way, they go by various names. There's Rephaim, there's the Philistines, the people of Anak, Anak. So all these nations are. It looks like they eventually are destroyed. Actually, if you remember, God orders genocide on these nations. I mean, God talks about raise everything down to the dirt, even the animals. So why is that? It could be because these are descendants or another outbreak of demonic activity that happens that results in more giants. And so I believe they're eventually destroyed, as the Hebrew Bible notes, and
so
they're not around today, I don't think.
right, but to play devil's advocate here, that woman Doris from the entity case, she claims that she was raped, so she just didn't get pregnant from her rape. Can we guarantee that any of these fallen angels that may still be doing this today, they're just not getting women pregnant? We
Yeah, I
don't
mean,
know. I think we don't know. You can sit and guess all you want, but it's something to consider and to not just throw off.
yeah, there's a category difference, right? Fallen angels were able to procreate. I don't think demons are able to. But again, yes, it's we're playing fast and loose here because the information is so limited. So
So are there any female Nephilim? I mean, we don't know. I mean, it says they were the offspring. It doesn't say male or female. The only thing we see is the male in terms of the big, Goliath type people. Do you have any answer to that?
there's no record of that.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it could be that they took just women, normal women, like the fallen angels. So
Mm-hmm. Well, and in the same sense here, then those Nephilim, like say Goliath, he could probably procreate with other human women. You wouldn't have to have another Nephilim, or they could. I mean, it doesn't really tell us, so it's kind of beyond discussion, I would say. What do you think?
yeah, yeah, same.
Mm-hmm.
This question here, I don't know if you brought this up. What
Yeah,
would
that was
stop more
next.
Nephilim? Yeah.
Yeah,
So
right,
we
right. Yeah, go ahead.
also this one from Freddie. Thanks, Freddie, for the correction. I think I said 8 foot 2 or 3, just above 8. Actually, he was almost 9, 8 foot 11. So that's probably this is Watlow is the name. Oh, he was American. Sorry, I think I said British. Did I?
Yeah, you did.
So so yeah, but again, we're dealing here with races, nations of giants, not just one individual or two.
But it starts with one. Maybe he's a small Nephilim.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah, how about that other question you had up there?
Yeah, I think we sort of dealt with that. I believe they're done and dusted. Um, I think if there's still a race of giants, we'll definitely know. I mean, we can't even find Bigfoot, right? One family of Bigfoot. So
Right. Yeah. There is a question that I'd like you to just briefly address. I brought up to you. One sister brought it up from Hebrews 1, verse 5, to where it
mhm.
says, to which of the angels did God ever say, you are my son, today I have fathered you? And another place he says, I will be his father and he will be my son. So explain the difference between this and those sons of God in Genesis 6. I mean, that's a different phrase. It's totally different, the begotten part of it.
Yeah, it's all about context, obviously. So in the New Testament, we are called sons of God. Obviously, Jesus is the Son of God, singular. I don't think it has anything to do with the phrase as used in the Old Testament, sons of God, especially in the plural. Israel is called obviously a son of God in the Hebrew Bible, but yeah, these are different things. So it's just explained by the different setting of the old versus the new.
Mm-hmm. If there are any other questions, get them in the
Um,
chat now before we
just,
end.
yeah, just to clear something up about the spirits in prison.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe they're the fallen angels of Genesis 6, right? The spirits, which is for used for angels or demons, unqualified. They're not active. Those groups of angels, they're imprisoned. That's why they're down there. Jude and Peter talk about how they're even in chains. They're held in bondage. So they're pretty much secure down there if Tartarus is down below in the earth. So they cannot be reproducing or making more giants. The theory is that by Genesis saying that uh, there were Nephilim during those days and after, the theory is that more fallen angels came and did likewise, like those first, let's say, first generation fallen angels. But the spirits in prison are those fallen angels of Genesis 6. They're securely uh, imprisoned. And yeah, so.
Right. And I think one important thing to note as well, we mentioned before, they can't be humans because humans are dead. And when they die, they're done. But we don't see, people will say that, oh, well, angels can't die. Well, it never says anywhere that angels can't die. But what we do see is they don't die like we do because they obviously live on and on. But we do know they can be destroyed because it says the lake of fire has been prepared for Satan and his angels. And which is why I believe they're being held there to be judged at the end of the days by Jesus when he does that, rather than God just destroying them back at the time of Noah. He decided for whatever reason to put them in prison.
Right. So is that Matthew 24? Um, the lake of fire for the
Yeah,
angels?
I don't remember. 25, I think.
25. Yeah. So
Mhm.
yeah, in Matthew 25. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, my opponent actually brought that up. Angels are not by nature immortal. Again, like us, right? They will have conditional immortality, or they have, I should say, conditional. And oh, the other thing with Christadelphians and other Christians is that they seem to have a view of angels as not having a free will, as if, almost like robots. I believe angels have free will. If you
Mhm.
believe that there's an external Satan devil who is himself a fallen angel, obviously he has a free will and he has many demons and other fallen angels with him. So I think that was also one of the debates we were having, that people who do not hold to the fallen angels view of Genesis 6, they seem to think that angels are some kind of robot or something. But
Well, and they have a choice. They can obey God or not, as we see throughout Scripture, just like human beings, and um, God gives choice. I don't see any more questions there. If you have one, get it in quick now. Carlos, if you have any other thoughts in regard to this topic before we end.
yep, I'll just close with this scripture I was just reminded of. So Paul in Ephesians 6, not 1, I said 1. Let me just read this and I'll sign off with this. And thanks, Tracy, for hosting. Finally, be strengthened in the Lord and in the strength of his power. Clothe yourselves with the full armor of God, so that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against rulers, powers, world rulers of this darkness, the spiritual forces of evil in the heavens. For this reason, take up the full armor of God, so that you may be able to stand your ground on the evil day. And having done everything to stand, stand firm, therefore, by fastening the belt of truth around your waist, putting on the breastplate of righteousness, by fitting your feet with the preparation that comes from the gospel, the good news of peace, and in all of this, by taking up the shield of faith with, with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. So the point here is, once again, that, these are not fanciful things. These have to do with who you are, who other people are, and who you're battling in this life. You
Mm-hmm.
have to understand, and this is something I had to understand the hard way when I became a Christian. But you have to understand that we're in a battle, not necessarily against one another, although we are, but there's a greater battle Paul has here in Ephesians 6 in mind. So Paul
Mm-hmm.
very much believed in these things. He preaches about these things. He warns about the Satan, the devil, the evil one, and he warns, or I should say, he admonishes Christians and the church to take all these, uh, what is it, military, symbols, and especially the truth, right? Um, where is it? I lost it already. Uh, the belt of truth around your waist. So, thanks again, Tracy, and thanks again to my opponent for the debate. And I might have this debate again. I've been invited to do another one against someone else on Genesis 6. So, look forward to that maybe at the end of the year. So, thanks, Tracy.
Well, thank you, Carlos. And I would encourage people to go back and listen to your opening reasoning, why it's important to study this and to understand this. So if you missed that, please go back to the beginning and watch that. And in regard to what you just shared here, I think it is important, because if we don't know or acknowledge our enemy, how can you stand against him? So
Right.
thank you. And
And you will fall victim to the schemes of the devil, remember. Thank
right.
you, Tracy.
Right. Thank you, Carlos.
Remember the 5 W's. Thanks.
Yes, yes. Don't forget them. And I would like to thank all of you who are watching live with us, and anybody who is watching the replay. As I said, go back and check out the beginning if you missed it, because I think it's really important, and it's the main reason why Carlos is even discussing this in a debate form. It's important. And as I mentioned earlier on, I'll paste a link in the chat with the video I have done for the youth this Sunday. If you're not on Sunday morning, take a look at it. And if you are, wait till then to watch it. It's for the youth or those who are young at heart. Just kind of an easy look at Genesis 6 if you're not into the real deep stuff. And I think it should be easy to look at. Also, mark your calendars, and you can join me live on September 10th at 7:30. I will be discussing a biblical discussion on abortion with Sister Carla. She was in the mission conference last year, and it should be really interesting. We have a lot of talk going on about abortion with this whole political thing going on right now, and I think Christians need to be aware of the issues at hand, and they are not kept away from this. I bet any church you go to or any fellowship, there are probably young girls who are getting pregnant, and many of them who are considering abortion. And if we don't talk about this and talk about babies as they are, the only thing they're going to hear is what they hear from the left. And I think that's a big problem in the Christian community. So please do hit the subscribe button, hit the bell, so that you won't miss this important discussion and any other videos that come out. The link will also be on kogmissions.com in the next few days. And as always, we encourage everyone to please open your Bible and test what you hear with Scripture and study to show yourself approved. Thank you again for joining us tonight, and have a blessed evening.